The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the valley as Bethany James watched the last of her family's savings disappear with the fleeing silhouette of a man she once called friend. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the hollowness that had taken residence in her chest. Green River, Wyoming in 1876 was no place for a woman alone, especially one who had just lost everything. The sun beat down mercilessly as Bethany stumbled back toward the small ranch she had inherited from her father just 8 months prior. At 23, she had been determined to make something of the struggling cattle operation. Now, with the money meant for new stock stolen and her foreman revealed as nothing but a thief, that dream seemed as barren as the Wyoming landscape in the height of summer. Bethany's once pristine blue dress was now stained with dust and blood as she trudged up the path to the modest 2-story ranch house. Her golden hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around her shoulders. She didn't bother to fix it. What was the point? By next week, she would likely lose the ranch anyway. Inside, the house felt emptier than usual. Her father had built it with his own hands, expecting to fill it with generations of James' children. Instead, consumption had taken him too early, leaving Bethany as the sole heir to a legacy she now feared she couldn't maintain. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the kitchen table and stared blankly out the window. The land stretched out before her, acres of potential that would soon belong to the bank, unless a miracle happened. The sound of approaching hoofbeats snapped her out of her reverie. Visitors were rare this far out from town. Bethany quickly grabbed her father's old rifle from above the door, wincing as her wounded arm protested the movement. She wasn't about to be caught unaware twice in one day. Through the window, she could make out a lone rider approaching. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat easy in the saddle with the confidence of a man who belonged on horseback. His black hat shaded his face, but there was something in his posture that didn't trigger the same alarm bells as her treacherous foreman had. Still, Bethany kept the rifle ready as she stepped onto the porch. "That's far enough," she called out when the rider was within earshot. "State your business." The rider reined in his dappled gray stallion and raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Name's Brent Dawson, madam." "I heard there might be work at the James Ranch." Bethany nearly laughed at the bitter irony. "You're about 6 hours too late, Mr. Dawson. This ranch won't be hiring anyone. Not now, not ever again, most likely." She noticed then that his gaze had moved to her blood-stained sleeve. His expression shifted from polite inquiry to concern. "You're hurt," he said simply, dismounting in one fluid motion despite her earlier warning to keep his distance. "Mind if I take a look at that?" There was something in his direct blue gaze that made Bethany lower the rifle slightly. "It's nothing, just a graze." "A bullet graze isn't nothing, madam." He approached slowly, hands visible as if she were a spooked horse. "I've got some medical experience." Perhaps it was the blood loss, or maybe the events of the day had simply worn down her resistance, but Bethany found herself nodding. "Come inside, then. But leave your gun belt on the porch." If he was offended by her caution, he didn't show it. Brent unbuckled his holster and set it carefully on the porch railing before following her into the house. In the kitchen light, Bethany got her first proper look at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with sun-bronzed skin, and the beginnings of crow's feet around his eyes that spoke of long days under the western sky. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were trail-worn, they were clean. "Sit," he instructed, his voice gentle but firm. When she complied, he rolled up her sleeve with surprising delicacy for hands so large and calloused. "Want to tell me how this happened?" Bethany winced as he examined the wound. "My foreman decided the money for new cattle would serve him better than it would the ranch. He took exception to my disagreement." Brent's hand stilled momentarily before continuing their careful work. "He shot you and ran with your money. That about sums it up. Sheriff been notified." Bethany shook her head. "Sheriff Hollister is 3 days out handling some dispute at the Carter place. By the time he gets back, Jenkins will be long gone." Brent reached for the water pitcher and poured some into a basin. "Jenkins, I'll remember that name." There was something in his tone that made Bethany study him more carefully. "Are you a bounty hunter, Mr. Dawson?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, madam, just a cowhand looking for honest work." He cleaned her wound with efficiency, his touch surprisingly gentle. "But I don't take kindly to men who shoot women and steal their livelihoods." "Well, it hardly matters now," Bethany said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Without that money, I can't restock. Without stock, I can't make the payments to the bank. In a month, 2 at most, this place won't be mine anymore." Brent wrapped a clean strip of cloth around her arm and secured it. "How much did he take?" $2,000. "My father's life insurance money and every cent I had saved." He let out a low whistle. "That's a considerable sum." "It was meant to buy enough cattle to make this place profitable again," Bethany said, rising from her chair and moving to the stove. The least she could do was offer coffee to the man who'd tended her wound. "My father had to sell off most of the herd when he got sick. I've been working with skeleton stock for months, trying to build things back up." As she prepared the coffee, she could feel Brent watching her. Not in the way men sometimes did, assessing her as a woman, but with thoughtful consideration, as if piecing together a puzzle. "How many head do you have left?" he asked. 23, and one ornery bull that's more trouble than he's worth." The coffee began to bubble and she poured 2 cups, sliding one across the table to him. Brent nodded his thanks. 23's not nothing. With the right management, you could build from that." Bethany gave a humorless laugh. "Perhaps, if I had years to do it. The bank wants their money in 6 weeks. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the occasional chirp of birds outside and the soft ticking of her father's old clock on the mantel. "I could help," Brent finally said, his voice quiet but sure. Bethany looked up sharply. "I can't pay you, Mr. Dawson." "Didn't you hear what I just said?" "I heard. And I'm not asking for money, not up front anyway. I'm proposing a partnership of sorts." She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "What kind of partnership?" "I've been saving to buy my own spread someday. I've got about $800 to my name. Not enough for a ranch, but enough to buy some cattle at the right price." He took a sip of his coffee. "I've also got contacts ranchers who might be willing to sell a few head at below market if approached right." "And why would you invest your life savings in a failing ranch run by a woman you just met?" Bethany's voice was laced with skepticism. Brent met her gaze steadily. "Because I know good land when I see it, and because I've been looking for a place to put down roots. I'm tired of drifting from ranch to ranch. If we can make this work, I'd ask for a quarter share of the profits once the place is back on its feet." "A quarter share," Bethany repeated, considering. It was actually a fair offer, perhaps even generous given the circumstances. "And if we fail?" "Then we fail together, and I go back to being a hired hand somewhere else." He shrugged, the gesture somehow both casual and decisive. "But I don't plan on failing, Miss James." There was something about his confidence that sparked a flicker of hope in Bethany's chest. Still, she'd just been betrayed by a man she'd trusted and caution won out. "I'll need to think about it." Brent nodded, respecting her hesitation. "Of course, I don't expect an answer today." He finished his coffee and stood. "In the meantime, I noticed your south fence line needs mending. Mind if I take a look at it?" Consider it a good faith gesture." Bethany found herself agreeing, and within the hour, Brent had saddled up and ridden out to inspect the fences. Left alone, she tried to make sense of the whirlwind that her day had become. This morning, she'd had a plan and the means to execute it. Now, she was wounded, robbed, and considering a partnership with a complete stranger who had mysteriously appeared just when she needed help the most. It was too coincidental to be comfortable. Yet there was something about Brent Dawson that inspired trust, despite her recent experience. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or how he'd tended her injury without making her feel weak. Whatever it was, Bethany found herself hoping he might truly be the miracle she needed. By dusk, Brent had returned, having mended several weak spots in the fence line. He accepted her offer of supper, a simple meal of beans and biscuits, with genuine appreciation. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Bethany said as they finished eating. "If we're to consider this partnership, I'd need to know more about you. Where you're from, your experience with ranching, why you happened to ride up to my door today of all days." Brent leaned back in his chair, considering her questions. "Fair enough. I was born in Missouri, but my family moved to Colorado when I was 12. My father ran cattle there until the war. I fought for the Union, came home to find my parents had died of influenza while I was gone." The matter-of-fact way he delivered this tragic information spoke of old wounds that had healed, if imperfectly. Bethany felt a pang of sympathy, but kept her expression neutral. "After that, I worked ranches across Colorado, Nebraska, and more recently Montana. I was trail boss for the Mitchell spread near Helena for 3 years, until the owner's son took over and decided he knew better than the men who'd been running cattle since before he could walk." "And what brought you to Wyoming, to my ranch specifically?" "Word gets around about which ranches are hiring. I heard in town that the James place might need hands." He paused, then added with quiet honesty, "I didn't know the owner would be a woman until I arrived, but that doesn't change my offer." Bethany studied him, trying to detect any hint of deception. "And you're certain you can help rebuild this place? It's a mighty task for just 2 people." "I didn't say it would be easy," Brent replied, "but yes, I believe it's possible. With hard work and a bit of luck, we could have enough cattle to make your bank payment and keep this place running." The clock struck 8, reminding Bethany how late it had grown. Making such an important decision while exhausted seemed unwise. "I'll give you my answer in the morning, Mr. Dawson. You're welcome to stay in the bunkhouse tonight." Brent nodded, accepting her terms. "Thank you, Miss James. I'll be ready to work at first light, whatever you decide." As she watched him walk toward the bunkhouse, Bethany felt a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. She'd always prided herself on being a good judge of character, until Jenkins had proved her wrong so dramatically. Was she making another mistake by even considering Brent's offer? Yet as she prepared for bed, checking that her father's revolver was loaded and within reach, Bethany found herself leaning toward acceptance. What choice did she really have? Without help, the ranch was already lost. With Brent, there was at least a chance. Morning came with the soft golden light that made the Wyoming landscape look like something from a painting. Bethany had slept fitfully, her wounded arm throbbing and her mind racing with possibilities and fears. By the time she dressed and made her way downstairs, she could smell coffee brewing. In the kitchen, she found Brent already at work. He'd started the stove, put on coffee, and was examining her father's old ledger books that had been left on the side table. "Hope you don't mind," he said, looking up as she entered. "Figured you could use a cup after yesterday." "Thank you," Bethany said, accepting the offered cup. The simple courtesy touched her more than she cared to admit. "Have you been looking at the accounts?" Brent nodded, his expression serious. Your father kept good records. It helps to know exactly where we stand. The use of we wasn't lost on Bethany. I've made my decision, she said, deciding that directness was best. I accept your proposal, Mr. Dawson. A quarter share of profits once we're back on our feet in exchange for your investment and expertise. Relief and determination crossed his face in equal measure. You won't regret it, Miss James, and please call me Brent. Bethany, she offered in return. Setting down her cup, she added, we should put our agreement in writing. I've learned the hard way about handshake deals. I'd expect nothing less, Brent agreed. We can ride into town this afternoon, have the lawyer draw something up proper. The business-like efficiency with which they settled the details gave Bethany confidence. By mid-morning, they had worked out a plan. Brent would use his savings to purchase cattle from his contacts in Montana and Colorado, while Bethany would work on securing a short extension from the bank. Together, they would rebuild the herd and bring the James Ranch back to profitability. As they rode into Green River that afternoon, Bethany was acutely aware of the curious glances they received. News of Jenkins' betrayal had clearly spread. She held her head high, refusing to show how deeply the whispers and pitying looks affected her. At the bank, Mr. Patterson, the manager, received them in his office with thinly veiled skepticism. Miss James, while I sympathize with your situation, the bank cannot simply extend loans indefinitely. We've already been quite generous with the terms. Bethany felt her cheeks flush with indignation. My father banked with you for 20 years, Mr. Patterson. Surely that counts for something. Business is business, my dear, Patterson replied with practiced regret. Without collateral or a significant payment, I'm afraid, we're prepared to make a good faith payment today, Brent interrupted, his voice calm but authoritative. And we've developed a comprehensive plan to bring the ranch to profitability within 6 months. Patterson's eyebrows rose at the we, his gaze moving between them with renewed interest. I wasn't aware you had taken on a partner, Miss James. A recent development, Bethany replied coolly. Mr. Dawson brings considerable ranching experience and additional capital to the operation. For the next half hour, Brent outlined their strategy with such confidence and detail that even Patterson began to look impressed. By the end of the meeting, they had secured a 3-month extension with modest interim payments, not as much time as they'd hoped for, but enough to implement the first phase of their plan. As they left the bank, Bethany felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That was impressive, she admitted to Brent. You convinced him when I've been trying for weeks. Brent shrugged. Men like Patterson often need to hear things from other men. It's not right, but it's how it is. There was an edge of disapproval in his voice that suggested he didn't share that particular prejudice. Their next stop was the law office of Herbert Coleman, a graying man who had handled the James family's legal matters for years. He drafted their partnership agreement with meticulous attention to detail, making sure both parties' interests were protected. As Bethany signed her name to the document, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at having found help when she needed it most, lingering anxiety about trusting her family's legacy to a man she barely knew, and beneath it all, a growing respect for Brent's straightforward approach to their predicament. With legal matters settled, they purchased supplies for the coming weeks and prepared to return to the ranch. At the general store, they encountered Mrs. Willard, the shopkeeper's wife and Green River's most prolific gossip. Bethany James, as I live and breathe. We've all been so worried after what happened with that scoundrel Jenkins. Her eyes darted curiously to Brent. And who might this gentleman be? Brent Dawson, madam, he answered before Bethany could speak. I'm Miss James' new business partner, Mrs. Willard's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline. Business partner. Well, isn't that progressive? The way she emphasized the last word made it clear what she really thought of the arrangement. Bethany forced a smile. Mr. Dawson has extensive experience in cattle ranching. We're combining our resources to expand operations. How practical of you, Mrs. Willard replied, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. I do hope you know what you're doing, dear. After what happened with Jenkins, Mr. Dawson and I have a legally binding contract, Bethany cut in, her patience wearing thin. And unlike Jenkins, Mr. Dawson has actually invested his own money in the ranch's success. The older woman had the grace to look abashed. Of course, dear. I'm sure it will all work out splendidly. Her gaze lingered on Brent, assessing. You be sure to take good care of our Bethany. She's been through quite enough already. Yes, madam, Brent replied with respectful gravity. That's my intention. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Bethany sighed. I apologize for Mrs. Willard. By sundown, everyone in 3 counties will know about our arrangement. Does that bother you? Brent asked, securing a sack of flour. Bethany considered the question honestly. Not as much as losing the ranch would. Let them talk. The ride back was mostly silent, both of them lost in thought about the challenges ahead. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning the scrubby grassland into a tapestry of gold and amber. It's beautiful country, Brent remarked as they crested a rise that offered a view of the James Ranch sprawled below. Your father chose well. He always said it spoke to him, Bethany replied, feeling a pang of memory. Said the first time he saw this valley, he knew it was where he wanted to raise his family. Brent nodded, understanding. Land can be like that, gets into your blood. As they approached the ranch house, Bethany was struck by how different it looked with the promise of salvation. This morning, it had seemed like a burden she was about to lose. Now, it represented possibility again. They settled into a routine over the next few days. Brent rose before dawn to tend to the existing cattle, mend fences, and assess what other repairs the property needed. Bethany managed the household, kept the books, and worked alongside him when extra hands were needed. They were careful to maintain a professional distance, each aware of how their partnership might be perceived by others. A week after Brent's arrival, he prepared to leave for Montana, where he had arranged to purchase 30 head of cattle at a favorable price from a former employer. I should be gone about 2 weeks, he told Bethany as he packed his saddlebags. Think you can manage alone that long? There was genuine concern in his question, and Bethany appreciated that he'd asked rather than assumed she couldn't. I managed for 8 months before you came along, she reminded him with a small smile. I think I can handle 2 weeks. Fair point, he acknowledged. Still, keep that rifle handy, and if Jenkins shows his face again, I won't miss this time, Bethany assured him, her voice hardening at the mention of her former foreman. Brent studied her for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. I've left a list of what needs doing while I'm gone. Nothing urgent, but if you get to some of it, it'll put us ahead. The casual us no longer felt strange to Bethany's ears. In just a week, they had formed a working relationship built on mutual respect and common purpose. She wasn't ready to call it friendship yet, but it was heading in that direction. The morning of Brent's departure dawned clear and cool. Bethany rose early to prepare a hearty breakfast and pack provisions for his journey. They ate in companionable silence, going over last-minute details. Remember, if Olson from the bank comes by, show him the improvements we've already made, Brent said as he finished his coffee. Let him see we're serious about the place. I will, Bethany promised. And you remember to get those cattle for the price we agreed on. No more. Brent's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Yes, madam." As he mounted his horse, saddlebags packed and hat pulled low against the morning sun, Bethany felt a curious reluctance to see him go. It wasn't just concern about managing alone again, it was the realization that she'd grown accustomed to his steady presence in a remarkably short time. "Safe travels, Brent," she said, standing on the porch. "I'll keep things running here." He tipped his hat to her. "I know you will. I'll be back before you know it." With that, he turned his horse toward the trail and rode off, his figure gradually becoming smaller until he disappeared over the ridge. Bethany stood watching long after he was gone, an unfamiliar emptiness settling in her chest. Shaking it off, she turned back to the house. There was work to be done, and no time for sentimentality. The first week of Brent's absence passed uneventfully. Bethany fell back into her solitary routine, though she found herself tackling items from the list he'd left with determined energy. There was satisfaction in knowing that each completed task brought them closer to their goal of revitalizing the ranch. On the 8th day, trouble arrived in the form of 3 riders who appeared just before sunset. Bethany was in the barn, finishing the evening feeding, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Grabbing the rifle she now kept with her at all times, she stepped into the fading light. The men reined in their horses a respectful distance from the barn. The leader, a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard, removed his hat. "Evening, madam. Name's Carter. These are my boys, Tom and Frank. We're looking for a man called Dawson. Heard he might be working this spread." Bethany kept the rifle visible but lowered. "Mr. Dawson is my business partner, but he's not here at present. What's your business with him?" Carter replaced his hat, his expression unreadable. "Just looking to settle an old debt. When do you expect him back?" Something in the man's tone raised Bethany's suspicions. "I'm not sure. He's away on ranch business. Could be a week, could be longer." The youngest of the 3 men, Frank, presumably shifted impatiently in his saddle. "Pa, we don't have time for quiet, boy," Carter snapped, then turned back to Bethany with a forced smile. "Well, when he returns, you tell him Silas Carter came calling. He'll know what it's about." With that cryptic message, the 3 men turned their horses and rode away, leaving Bethany uneasy. She hadn't liked the hard set of their faces or the way their hands had stayed too close to their holsters throughout the brief encounter. That night, she double-checked all the doors and windows before retiring, the rifle propped against her bedside table. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams troubled by shadowy figures and unspoken threats. The next morning, Bethany rode into town, ostensibly to mail a letter but really to see what she could learn about Silas Carter. At the post office, she casually mentioned the visit to the postmaster, Samuel Jenkins, no relation to her thieving foreman, thankfully. "Carter, you say? Big man, beard going gray." When Bethany nodded, Samuel frowned. "I'd steer clear of him if I were you, Miss James. The Carters have a reputation. They run a spread up north near the Montana line, but folks say they don't limit themselves to honest ranching." "What do you mean?" Bethany pressed. Samuel lowered his voice. "Rustling, mostly, maybe worse. Sheriff's never been able to prove anything, but cattle have a way of disappearing when the Carters are in the area." This information only heightened Bethany's concern. What connection could Brent have to people like that? She tried to remind herself that she didn't really know him well. Despite their partnership and the trust she'd placed in him, Brent Dawson remained largely a mystery. Over the next few days, Bethany found herself jumping at shadows, the rifle never far from reach. The Carters didn't return, but the knowledge that they were looking for Brent, and not in a friendly way, cast a pall over the ranch. 2 days before Brent was due to return, a spring storm blew in from the mountains. Rain lashed the windows, and thunder shook the house to its foundations. Bethany spent the evening by the fire, mending clothes and trying to ignore the howling wind. A particularly violent gust rattled the shutters, and she looked up, startled. For a moment, she thought she'd heard something else beneath the storm's fury, a human sound. Setting aside her mending, she reached for the rifle and moved cautiously to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could just make out a figure staggering toward the house. Her first thought was of the Carters, returned despite the storm, but as lightning briefly illuminated the yard, she recognized the drenched form of Brent Dawson. Bethany flung open the door, heedless of the rain that immediately soaked her dress. Brent! He stumbled the last few steps to the porch, nearly collapsing against the railing. In the lantern light, Bethany could see he was not only soaked but injured, a dark stain spread across his left side that wasn't just rainwater. "Inside," she ordered, helping him through the door. "What happened?" "You're early and you're hurt." "Ran into some trouble," Brent managed through gritted teeth as she helped him to a chair by the fire. "Had to leave the cattle with Peterson's outfit. They'll bring them when the weather clears." Bethany was already gathering medical supplies. "What kind of trouble?" "Was it the Carters?" Brent's head snapped up, eyes suddenly sharp despite his pain. "The Carters? What do you know about them?" "They came looking for you about a week ago. Said something about settling an old debt." Bethany helped him remove his sodden coat and shirt, revealing a 6-inch gash along his ribs that was still seeping blood. "This needs stitching," Brent hissed as she cleaned the wound with whiskey from her father's supply. "It wasn't the Carters, at least not directly. Ran into some men who tried to rob me on the way back. One of them got lucky with a knife before I convinced them to look elsewhere for easy pickings." There was more to the story Bethany could tell by the way he avoided her gaze, but now wasn't the time to press. With steady hands, she stitched the wound closed, just as she'd learned to do for her father during his illness. "You've done this before," Brent observed, watching her work. "My father taught me. Said a rancher's daughter should know how to patch up men and beasts alike." She tied off the last stitch and began bandaging his torso. "Now about the Carters. Who are they to you?" Brent sighed, the sound heavy with something that might have been regret. "It's a long story and not one I'm proud of." "We've got time," Bethany said, sitting back once the bandage was secured. "The storm's not letting up any time soon, and I think I deserve to know if my business partner has enemies who might come calling." For a long moment, Brent was silent, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, despite the storm raging outside. 5 years ago, I worked for Silas Carter. Didn't know then what I know now about his operation. By the time I realized he was rustling cattle from neighboring ranches, I was in deep." He paused, accepting the cup of coffee Bethany offered. "When I decided to leave, Silas wasn't happy, said I knew too much. There was a fight. His eldest son, John, pulled a gun. I was faster." "You killed him?" Bethany asked, her voice carefully neutral. Brent shook his head. "Wounded him in the shoulder. Could have killed him, but I didn't. Still, Silas swore he'd see me dead for it. I've been moving from ranch to ranch ever since, never staying too long in one place." "Until now," Bethany observed. "Until now," he agreed, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Bethany. I should have told you. If you want me to leave once the storm passes—" "No," she interrupted, surprised by her own vehemence. "No, I don't want you to leave. But I do need to know if the Carters are likely to cause trouble for the ranch." Brent considered this seriously. "They might. Silas doesn't forget and he doesn't forgive, but I don't think he'd harm you to get to me. That's not his style. More likely he'd try to drive me off, force me to face him directly." Bethany nodded, processing this information. "Then we'll be ready for him. This ranch has seen its share of troubles. The Carters will just be one more." The simple inclusion of "we" seemed to affect Brent deeply. He looked at her with something like wonder. Most people would show me the door after hearing that story. I'm not most people, Bethany replied. And I believe in judging a man by his actions, not his past. You've done nothing but help me since you arrived. She stood, gathering the medical supplies. You should rest. You can take my father's room tonight. It's too cold for you to go to the bunkhouse with that injury. Brent started to protest, but exhaustion and blood loss were clearly taking their toll. With Bethany's help, he made it upstairs to the bedroom that had belonged to her father. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. Bethany squeezed his hand once before gently withdrawing. "Rest. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." Downstairs, she added more wood to the fire and sat in her father's old chair listening to the storm. The revelations of the evening tumbled through her mind. Brent had enemies, dangerous ones. Yet instead of feeling betrayed by this withheld information, Bethany found herself more concerned for his safety than her own. When had that happened? When had this business arrangement, born of desperation, begun to feel like something more? Bethany couldn't pinpoint the moment, but she knew with sudden clarity that her feelings for Brent Dawson had evolved beyond mere partnership or even friendship. The realization should have frightened her. After Jenkins' betrayal, she'd sworn to be more cautious with her trust. Yet here she was, harboring growing affection for a man with a complicated past and dangerous enemies. But Brent wasn't Jenkins. Where her former foreman had been smooth, talking, and evasive, Brent was straightforward and honest even about the parts of his past he wasn't proud of. He'd invested his savings in her ranch, worked alongside her without complaint, and returned to her despite his injury when he could have simply disappeared with the cattle money. These thoughts kept Bethany awake long after the fire had died down to embers. Eventually, she dozed off in the chair, the rifle across her lap and the storm still raging outside. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of calm that belied the tumultuous night. Bethany awoke stiff from sleeping in the chair to find Brent already up and moving about the kitchen despite his injury. "You should be resting," she chided, taking the coffee pot from his hands. "I've had worse," he replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested he was in more pain than he admitted. "And there's work to be done. Peterson's men will be bringing the cattle once the trails dry out." Bethany pushed him gently into a chair. "The work will wait until you're healed enough to do it properly. Now sit and let me check those stitches." To her surprise, he complied without argument. As she examined the wound, relieved to find no signs of infection, Brent watched her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I've been thinking about the Carters," he said as she replaced the bandage. "It might be best if I moved on after all. I won't put you and the ranch in danger." Bethany straightened, hands on hips. "That's not happening. We have a contract, Mr. Dawson, and I expect you to honor it." "Contracts can be amended," he pointed out. "Your safety is worth more than any business agreement. And what about the ranch? Without the cattle you've arranged for and without your help to manage them, I'll lose everything anyway." She sat across from him, her gaze direct. "Besides, running hasn't solved your problem so far. Maybe it's time to stand your ground." Brent studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected when I rode up that first day." "Is that a compliment, Mr. Dawson?" The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. "Decidedly so, Miss James." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air that acknowledged the growing connection neither had yet put into words. Bethany felt her cheeks warm and busied herself with preparing breakfast to hide her reaction. They spent the day making preparations for the arrival of the new cattle. Despite Bethany's protests, Brent insisted on helping with the lighter tasks, careful not to tear his stitches. By evening, they had repaired the corral fencing and cleared space in the barn for any calves that might need extra attention. As they shared a simple supper of stew and biscuits, Brent broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "We should consider hiring at least one more hand once the cattle arrive. The two of us can't manage everything, especially with the calving season coming." Bethany nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking the same, but after Jenkins, I'm hesitant to bring strangers onto the ranch." "Understandable," Brent agreed. "But I know a man, Joseph Miller, worked with him in Colorado. He's getting on in years but knows cattle better than anyone I've ever met. Most importantly, he's honest to a fault." "You trust him?" "With my life," Brent said simply. "He was the one who advised me to leave the Carter outfit when he suspected what Silas was involved in." Bethany considered this. "If you vouch for him, that's good enough for me. Can you send word?" "I'll ride into town tomorrow and telegraph him," Brent said. "If he's available, he could be here within 2 weeks." 2 days later, Peterson's men arrived with the cattle, 30 head of healthy stock that would form the foundation of the rebuilt herd. Brent, still moving carefully but healing well, directed the placement of the animals while Bethany handled the paperwork and payment. As the drovers prepared to leave, one of them, a grizzled man named Tucker, pulled Brent aside for a private word. From where she stood, Bethany could see Brent's expression grow serious as he listened. When he rejoined her, his face was grim. "What is it?" she asked once they were alone. "Tucker says there's word the Carters are asking about me in Montana. They know I've come south." Brent's jaw was set in a hard line. "It won't take them long to track me to Green River." Bethany absorbed this news with outward calm, though her heart raced. "Then we'll be ready when they come." "Bethany," Brent began, his voice low and urgent, "you don't understand what these men are capable of." "I understand perfectly well," she cut in. "They're bullies who think they can run roughshod over decent folk. Well, they'll find no easy pickings here." Her chin lifted defiantly. "This is my land, Brent, my father's legacy. I won't be driven from it by the likes of Silas Carter." Brent stared at her, something like admiration mingling with exasperation in his gaze. "You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I'll take that as a compliment too, Mr. Dawson." Despite the seriousness of the situation, a smile tugged at his lips. "You would." Over the next week, they settled into a rhythm of work that left little time for worrying about the Carters. The cattle needed tending, fences required constant maintenance, and preparations for spring calving kept them busy from dawn till dusk. Joseph Miller arrived 10 days after Brent's telegraph, riding up to the ranch house on a mule that looked nearly as old and weathered as he did. Despite his 70 years, Miller dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. "Brent Dawson, you ugly cuss," he called by way of greeting. "Heard you finally got tired of drifting." Brent grinned and clasped the older man's hand warmly. "Joe, good to see you." "Thanks for coming. Wouldn't have missed it. Not every day a confirmed bachelor like you settles down with a pretty partner." Miller's roomy eyes twinkled as he turned to Bethany. "You must be Miss James. Pleasure to meet the woman who finally corralled this one." Bethany felt her cheeks color at the implication, but she shook Miller's offered hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, Brent speaks highly of you. We're grateful for your help." "Just Joe, please. Mr. Miller makes me look around for my pa." He cast an appraising eye over the ranch. "Nice spread. Needs work, but good bones. You picked well, boy." As they showed Joe around the property, Bethany was impressed by his keen observations and practical suggestions. It was clear why Brent valued his expertise. By supper, Joe had already reorganized the feeding schedule for greater efficiency, and identified 3 pregnant cows they'd missed. That night, after Joe had retired to the bunkhouse, Bethany and Brent sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear spring sky. The air was cool but not uncomfortable, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Joe seems to think we're more than business partners," Bethany observed, breaking the companionable silence. Brent shifted in his chair. "I can set him straight if it bothers you." "It doesn't bother me," she replied honestly. "I just wondered what gave him that impression." For a moment Brent was silent, considering his words carefully. "Joe knows me well, better than most. He probably sees things I haven't said." Bethany's heart quickened at the implication. "And what might those things be?" Brent turned to look at her directly, his face half illuminated by the lantern hanging from the porch beam. "That I came here looking for work and found something I wasn't expecting. That working beside you these past weeks has meant more to me than just building a business." The simple honesty of his words touched Bethany deeply. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. "I didn't want to. After Jenkins, I swore I wouldn't trust so easily again, but you're not like him. You've proven that every day." Brent reached across the space between their chairs, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "I meant what I said before. If my presence here puts you in danger, don't," Bethany interrupted, her fingers tightening around his. "I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices. The Carters, the bank, the gossips in town, I'm done running from problems. We face them together or not at all." Something changed in Brent's expression, a softening, a decision made. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Bethany met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, Brent's hand had moved to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with tender reverence. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day," he confessed, his voice husky. "When you stood on this porch with that rifle, wounded but unbowed." Bethany turned her face to press a kiss into his palm. "And I think I started falling for you when you mended my fences without being asked." Brent laughed softly. "Not the most romantic beginning to a love story." "It suits us, though," Bethany smiled. "We're practical people." They might have kissed again, but the sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. Both were on their feet instantly, years of frontier caution overriding everything else. "Get inside," Brent ordered, reaching for the rifle that was never far from hand these days. "Wake Joe and bring him out the back way." "I'm not hiding," Bethany protested, but at Brent's urgent look, she nodded and slipped into the house. Minutes later, she returned with Joe, who had a shotgun cradled in his arms and a grim expression on his weathered face. They positioned themselves strategically, Brent on the porch, Joe and Bethany at windows on either side of the door, all with clear lines of fire. The riders, 4 of them, stopped at the edge of the yard, just visible in the spill of lantern light. Bethany recognized Silas Carter at their head, his 2 sons flanking him. The 4th man was a stranger, but the gun on his hip and the hard set of his face told its own story. "Dawson," Carter called, "come out and face me like a man." "I'm right here, Silas," Brent replied, his voice carrying across the yard. "State your business and then ride on. You're not welcome on this land." Carter laughed, an ugly sound. "That's rich coming from you, my business. You know damn well what my business is. You shot my boy and ran like a coward. I've come to settle that debt." "Your boy drew on me first," Brent said evenly, "and he lived. There's no debt to settle." "He lost the use of his arm." Carter's voice rose in anger. 5 years he suffered because of you." Inside, Bethany's grip tightened on her rifle. The rage in Carter's voice left no doubt that he meant to do Brent harm, perhaps fatal harm. "I'm sorry for that," Brent replied, and Bethany could hear the genuine regret in his tone. But it was self-defense, Silas. You know that as well as I do. Carter spat on the ground. Words, just words from a man who betrayed me, who turned his back on the outfit that took him in. An outfit that was stealing from honest ranchers, Brent countered. I wanted no part of that. Then you should have just left. But no, you had to play the hero, had to wound my boy. Carter's hand moved to rest on his holstered gun. Well, now it's time to pay. The tension in the air was palpable. Bethany's finger hovered near the trigger, her heart pounding. One wrong move from either side, and blood would be spilled on her land. There's a lady present, Silas. Joe's voice cut through the standoff, startling everyone. The old cowhand had stepped onto the porch beside Brent, his shotgun visible but pointed at the ground. And I know your mama raised you better than to conduct business like this in front of a lady. Carter's eyes narrowed as he recognized Joe. Miller. Should have known you'd be mixed up in this too. You always did have a soft spot for this boy. I have a soft spot for what's right, Joe replied calmly. And this isn't right, Silas. Coming to someone's home in the night with guns and threats, that's not the way men settle things. For a moment, no one spoke. Bethany held her breath, watching the play of emotions across Carter's face: anger, calculation, and something that might have been uncertainty. What do you propose then? Carter finally asked, his voice marginally less hostile. Daylight, Joe said simply. Come back tomorrow at noon. Alone. You and Brent talk this through like civilized men. If you still want satisfaction after that, well, that's between you two. But at least give talking a chance. Carter considered this, then nodded curtly. Noon tomorrow, but I warn you, Dawson, any tricks and it won't just be you who pays. His gaze moved to the house, clearly including Bethany in the threat. As the Carters rode away, Bethany emerged onto the porch, her rifle still in hand. You're not meeting him alone, she stated flatly. Brent turned to her, his expression grave. This is my fight, Bethany. My past catching up with me. I won't put you in the crossfire. It became my fight the moment he threatened my ranch, she countered. Besides, we're partners, remember? In everything. Joe cleared his throat meaningfully. Seems to me you two have more to discuss than just tomorrow's meeting. I'll take first watch, make sure our visitors don't circle back. With that, he ambled off toward the barn, tactfully giving them privacy. Once alone, Brent reached for Bethany, pulling her into a fierce embrace. I can't lose you, he murmured against her hair. Not when I've just found you. Bethany held him just as tightly, the rifle awkwardly pressed between them. Then don't push me away. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. They stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Finally, Brent pulled back enough to look into her eyes. We need a plan. Carter won't be satisfied with just talk. I know, Bethany agreed, but Joe bought us time and that's valuable. They spent the next hour strategizing, considering every possibility from negotiation to confrontation. Eventually, they settled on an approach that would give them the best chance of resolving the situation without bloodshed, though both were realistic enough to know that Carter might not leave them that option. Morning came all too quickly. Bethany had slept fitfully, waking at every sound, imagining the Carters returning under cover of darkness despite their agreement. But dawn arrived without incident, bringing with it a day that would determine the future of both the ranch and her relationship with Brent. After a tense breakfast, Brent and Joe rode out to check on the cattle, ensuring they were safely distant from the house in case things went badly. Bethany, meanwhile, prepared for Carter's arrival, positioning horses for a quick escape if needed and ensuring that Sheriff Hollister, who had returned to town, was aware of the situation. By 11:30, all three were back at the ranch house, making final preparations. Joe would position himself out of sight but within rifle range, providing backup if Carter violated the terms of their meeting. Brent would meet Carter in the yard, unarmed as agreed, and Bethany, despite Brent's protests, would be on the porch, ready to intervene if necessary. "I still don't like you being here," Brent told her as they waited, his face tight with concern. "I know," Bethany replied simply, "but this is my home and you are." She paused, searching for the right words. "I am what?" Brent prompted softly. Bethany met his gaze directly. "You are the man I love, and I won't hide while you risk your life alone." The declaration hung between them, momentous despite its simplicity. Brent's expression softened and he reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. "When this is over," he promised, "we'll have a proper conversation about that." The sound of an approaching rider interrupted the moment. Right on time, Silas Carter appeared at the edge of the property, riding alone as agreed. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, making a show of removing his gun belt and draping it over his saddle. "Let's get this over with, Dawson," he called, striding toward the house. Brent squeezed Bethany's hand once more before descending the porch steps to meet Carter in the yard. The two men stopped about 10 feet apart, sizing each other up. "You look well for a man who's been running for 5 years," Carter observed, his tone deceptively casual. "Not running anymore," Brent replied evenly. "I've found a place worth staying for." Carter's gaze flickered to Bethany on the porch, then back to Brent. "So I see. Pretty thing. Does she know what kind of man she's taken up with?" "She knows everything," Brent said. "Including what really happened that night with John." A muscle worked in Carter's jaw. "My boy hasn't been the same since. Can barely mount a horse with that arm, let alone work cattle." "I'm sorry for that," Brent said, and Bethany could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "But John gave me no choice. He drew first, Silas. You know that as well as I do." For a long moment Carter was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "He did at that. Hot-headed, my John always has been." The admission seemed to cost Carter something, and Bethany felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this confrontation might end peacefully after all. "Why did you really come here, Silas?" Brent asked. "After all this time, why track me down now?" Carter sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. "Things have changed. The ranch is struggling. John's useless with that arm, Frank's too young to take real responsibility, and I'm not getting any younger." "So what do you want from me?" Brent pressed. "Revenge won't fix any of that." "No," Carter agreed, "it won't, but maybe something else would." He straightened, his demeanor shifting from aggrieved father to businessman. "I came to offer you a deal, Dawson." This was unexpected. Bethany could see the surprise on Brent's face as well. "What kind of deal?" "I want you to come back and manage the ranch," Carter said bluntly. "You were the best hand I ever had. You know cattle, you know the land, and the men respect you. Help me get the place back on its feet and we'll call the debt settled." For a moment, Brent seemed speechless. Of all the outcomes they had prepared for, this hadn't been one of them. "I can't do that, Silas," he finally said. "I have commitments here, a partnership, a future." Carter's expression hardened. "I'm offering you a way out of this mess, Dawson, a way nobody has to get hurt." "Is that a threat?" Brent's voice took on an edge. "It's reality," Carter replied. "You think I came all this way just to talk and ride away? One way or another, you're coming back with me to make things right." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Bethany tensed, her hand moving to the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. Joe would be watching too, ready to intervene if needed. "There's another way," Bethany called, drawing both men's attention as she descended the porch steps. "One that could benefit all of us." Carter eyed her warily as she approached. "This ain't your concern, miss." "It is very much my concern, Mr. Carter," Bethany replied calmly, coming to stand beside Brent. "This is my ranch, and Mr. Dawson is my partner in every sense of the word." Something in her phrasing made Carter's eyebrows rise. "That's so." "It is," Brent confirmed, his hand finding Bethany's in a gesture that left no doubt about their relationship. "Well now," Carter murmured, reassessing the situation, "that does complicate things." "Not necessarily," Bethany continued. "You said your ranch is struggling. You need experienced management, but so do we." She glanced at Brent, who was watching her with a mixture of confusion and admiration. "What if we proposed a different kind of partnership?" "I'm listening," Carter said cautiously. "A breeding partnership," Bethany explained. "Your northern stock crossed with our southern cattle could produce calves well suited to both regions. We share resources, expertise, and profits. Brent stays here but visits your ranch quarterly to consult. And in return, you get access to new bloodlines and Brent's knowledge without losing your pride." It was an inspired solution, leveraging Bethany's business acumen with the practical realities of ranching. Brent squeezed her hand, silently acknowledging the brilliance of her proposal. Carter stroked his beard thoughtfully. "And what about John? How does he get justice in this arrangement?" "John gets a future," Bethany replied. "A profitable ranch that he can inherit without worrying whether it will support him with his disability. That's worth more than revenge, isn't it?" For a long moment, Carter was silent, weighing her words. Finally, he extended his hand not to Brent but to Bethany. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss James, but a fair one. Let's discuss the details." Relief washed through Bethany as she shook his hand. Beside her, Brent's tension visibly eased, though he remained cautious. "You're serious about this, Silas? No tricks," Carter shrugged. "I'm getting old, Dawson. Too old for feuds that don't put food on the table or money in the bank. The girl's proposal makes sense. It's business, not personal." "Then let's discuss it properly," Bethany suggested, gesturing toward the house. "Over coffee, like civilized people." By sunset, they had hammered out the framework of an agreement that satisfied all parties. Carter would return home to discuss it with his sons, then send formal paperwork once they'd agreed to the terms. It wasn't perfect. There remained a wariness between Brent and Carter that years of enmity had created, but it was a beginning. As they watched Carter ride away, Joe emerged from his hiding place, shotgun slung casually over his shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see Silas Carter leave without blood being spilled." "Credit goes to Bethany," Brent said, his arm around her waist. "She found a solution I never would have considered," Joe chuckled. "Smart women usually do." He headed toward the bunkhouse, calling over his shoulder, "Think I'll turn in early. Been a long day." Left alone as twilight deepened around them, Bethany and Brent stood in companionable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I meant what I said earlier," Bethany finally murmured. "About loving you." Brent turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face with tender reverence. "And I love you, Bethany James. Have since almost the beginning, I think. Just took me a while to admit it to myself." "We've come a long way from that first day," she observed, leaning into his touch. "Me with a bullet graze and you offering to save my ranch. Best decision I ever made," Brent said softly, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity to the James ranch. The formal agreement with Carter was signed. Joseph Miller agreed to stay on permanently as their foreman, and the spring calving season began in earnest. Bethany and Brent worked side by side from dawn till dusk, their partnership deepening in every sense. By early summer, the ranch was showing real signs of recovery. The new calves were healthy, the existing stock was thriving, and their first bank payment was made on time with enough left over to begin modest improvements to the property. On a warm June evening, Brent led Bethany to the top of a small rise overlooking the ranch. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the land, transforming the practical reality of their daily work into something almost magical. "I brought you up here for a reason," Brent said, taking both her hands in his. "To show you what I see when I look at our future." Bethany followed his gaze across the landscape, the ranch house nestled in its protective grove of cottonwoods, the new barn they'd raised with help from neighboring ranchers, the healthy cattle grazing in the distance. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Everything we've worked for." "Yes," Brent agreed, "but there's something missing." Before Bethany could question him, Brent dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band that gleamed in the evening light. "Bethany James, I came here looking for work and found the woman I want to spend my life with. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Bethany's eyes, not of sadness but overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Brent Dawson, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, Brent explained, "It was your mother's. Joe helped me find it in your father's things. I hope you don't mind." The thoughtfulness of the gesture only made the moment more perfect. "It's exactly right," Bethany assured him, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Green River, with Joe standing as Brent's best man and Mrs. Willard, who had become their unexpected champion in town, serving as Bethany's matron of honor. The entire community turned out for the celebration, Sheriff Hollister officiating with solemn dignity. Even Silas Carter sent a telegram of congratulations, along with a wedding gift of 2 prime bulls for their breeding program. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was a step toward a future without the shadow of old grievances. As they danced together at their wedding celebration, held in the newly repaired barn and attended by every rancher for 20 miles, Bethany rested her head on Brent's shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible after her father's death. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Dawson," Brent murmured against her hair. "I was just thinking about the day we met," she replied. "How close I came to giving up if you hadn't ridden up when you did." Brent's arms tightened around her. "But I did, and you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger with a past." "The best chance I ever took," Bethany said, lifting her face for his kiss. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home, Bethany felt the weight of the past few months crash over her unexpectedly. All the fear, the uncertainty, the struggle suddenly welled up, released by the safety of having finally reached this moment of happiness. "I failed everyone," she cried suddenly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My father, who trusted me to keep the ranch going. The hands who depended on me for their livelihoods. Myself, for believing Jenkins was trustworthy." Brent gathered her close, his hands gentle as they wiped away her tears. "You haven't failed me," he said with quiet certainty, "and you didn't fail anyone else either. Look at what you've accomplished, Bethany. The ranch is thriving. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become." In the circle of his arms, Bethany felt the truth of his words settle into her heart. She hadn't failed. She had persevered through difficulties that would have broken many others. And in doing so, she had found not just survival, but love and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. "Come inside, wife," Brent said softly when her tears had subsided. "Tomorrow is the first day of our new life together." Hand in hand, they entered the house, no longer just the James Ranch, but the Dawson James Ranch, a symbol of their partnership and the future they would build together. As the years passed, that future blossomed beyond their most optimistic hopes. The breeding partnership with the Carters proved profitable for both ranches, eventually leading to a genuine reconciliation as business interests overcame old animosities. Joseph Miller remained with them until his peaceful passing in 1882, by which time he had trained a new generation of hands in his meticulous methods. Bethany and Brent's family grew too. Their first child, a son they named William Joseph after both their fathers, arrived in the spring of 1878, followed by twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, 2 years later. The house that Bethany's father had built to hold generations of James' children now rang with the laughter of Dawson James' children, fulfilling his vision in ways he could never have foreseen. By 1885, the Dawson James Ranch was known throughout Wyoming territory as one of the most innovative and successful operations in the region. Brent's expertise with cattle and Bethany's head for business proved to be a combination that could weather any challenge, from harsh winters to market downturns. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Brent took Bethany's hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band that still circled her finger. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About taking a chance on a drifter with a past all those years ago?" Bethany leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her from within. "Not a single one," she replied with absolute certainty. "That day you rode up was the luckiest day of my life, even if I didn't know it then." Brent pressed a kiss to her temple. "Mine too. And every day since has only confirmed it." As the sun set over their land, the legacy they would one day pass to their children, Bethany reflected on how close she had come to losing everything. One bullet, one desperate moment, one chance encounter had changed the course of her life. Where once she had seen only failure and loss, she now recognized the beginning of a journey that had brought her to this moment of complete happiness. The cowboy who had told her she hadn't failed him had given her far more than just the means to save her ranch. He had given her partnership, love, family, and the unshakable knowledge that together they could overcome whatever challenges life presented. In the gathering twilight, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and love, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that this land, this life, this love was everything she had ever wanted, and more than she had ever dared to dream.